Hello there and welcome back. Welcome to my classroom here again for part 2 of Welding Health and Safety. My name is Stephen Hoyle. I'm the resident tutor assessor here at Leeds Welding Centre, and it's my job to take you through the second part of the health and safety 3-part sessions that lead up to the online goaler. You might be able to see in the background there. We've got a little bit of reflection on part 2. And we'll be looking into personal protective equipment, accidents, first aid and fire. Hope you're all staying safe. Good to have you here again. And without further ado, I think we shall get on and start with the presentation. Oh, as I said, it's health and safety part 2, PPE, accidents, first aid and fire. And before I can get to the next slide, I just have to move myself out of the way. And there we go, pop it in. So, as I said, it's all goes towards the goaler that you'll take when you come into centre. I hope you've been looking at lesson 1 or gone back over your notes and the recording that was done earlier. And you should attend part 3, which will be coming up. So get yourselves booked on. For now, let's get on with part 2. Just before we go, just to go through the bullet points on this again, this important information. Remember that all the study for this exam, the 201, working in engineering, is remotely done, and you won't receive any further study and exam. It'll all be practical when you come into centre. You'll have expected to be thoroughly studied. It's up to you to study to expect if you want to pass, or indeed get a merit or a distinction. Please watch this lesson again and watch the recording several times, or as many times as you can, or as many times as you can stand this talking to you again. Please stick to the smart screen materials and the trade job mate videos that have been made available to you, and the websites that I pointed out to you on part 1. Those are very good. So go back over that session and look into those things for me. Just a quick little note before I go any further. I'm going to open my phone there, and hopefully you can see if I can get that nice and close. And can you see those apps there? We've got first aid apps, the St. John's and the Red Cross. Those are free apps, and they're quite useful, not only to have on your phone, but as learning aids as well. Also, there's a lot of free welding apps that you can get on your phone, and that will help you. And there's got all sorts of quizzes and revision notes that you can use on these apps, and they can have it with you wherever you go. So without further ado, we're going to jump straight into the presentation and look into our first slide, which is all about PPE. Now, you can see the PPE laid out there, and I've got quite a few things in front of me. So just rather than looking at a little slide full of things, I'm sure that you're all pretty used to these days, wherever you go, wearing a mask. Not really sufficient in the workplace, is it, for what we need? So we need something a little bit much more robust like this for a dust mask, things like that. I'm just pointing out a few things. Obviously, I know you all know about PPE. It's just what I'd like to talk about, suitability or fitness for purpose. So we're expected to wear a small disposable ear protection everywhere we are in a workshop. And of course, these throwaway disposable little earplugs. If you're doing anything heavy work, then you're onto the large ear defenders. All right. So we're covering our ears. We've got to protect our hearing. Then we go on to our eyes, and we've got various types of protection for our eyes. This is not sufficient if we're in a workshop. Glasses, as they're not resistant to impact, that sort of thing. So a couple of sets of types of glasses. We've got the light enhancing glasses there. So if they call these my happy glasses, when you put these on, the whole world looks a much brighter place, and it makes everything seem a little bit brighter. Standard glasses, not good enough for heavy grinding, where you need something a lot more robust that covers all around the edge of the eye, and you can always lift up to clear yourself in there. So this is a much more robust type of thing. Of course, you've got different sorts of gloves for different applications. So light welding gloves, gas welding and TIG welding. General work handling gloves. So these are rubberized and they've got Kevlar stitched into in between the fingers to stop cuts. And your heavy welding gloves, of course, there. All those that I've shown you there are all provided when you come into centre. And to make sure, oops, sorry. So when you come in, those things are provided for you, and you'll be able to make sure you're safe at all times. So let's move on from there. Now, looking at this thing, it's this slide, we've got to be very, very careful about personal hygiene. Never has it been more important than with the coronavirus around us all the time as well. So that's one aspect of keeping ourselves clean, because in this environment, you're going to get dirty, all right? But the thing is, dirt in cuts can cause serious infections. That leads us on to what the harmful ways, the ways in which harmful substances, rather, can find their way into your body. And these 4 bullet points on the screen are very important. And I want you to know these and be able to pick these out if you were asked it in an exam. So those are ingestion. So it means we eat that, okay, if it's on something that we take in. And of course, that's the one I showed you on lesson 1. There's the ingestion CLP packaging regulations. That's not easy doing that out to the small screen there. You've got inhalation, where you can breathe in the dangerous toxin or substance. Absorption, where it's taken in through the surface of the skin. Okay, it actually comes in through the pores of the skin. And injection, which has been added in the last few years. Whereas if you get punctured by something sharp, like a splinter of metal or wood or anything, and pushes the toxic substance actually into your body. All right. So don't forget, you were told on the chat at the side when you were joining the lesson to have some note making, taking paper and pen available to you. So make sure you can recognize these. Okay. Right, moving on, next slide. Obviously, there's quite a lot of information on here. It's just telling you the PPE for a situation and an injury that could occur. I'm not going to go through every single one of these, because I'm sure you've read and seen this at length everywhere, so to speak. But what I do want to raise your attention to is the bottom one, the dust mask, where it says the inhalation of particulate or gaseous causing emphysema or respiratory illness. I want to make sure you know the difference. A particulate is where something, maybe you've been grinding or sanding, and it's small dust particles of the actual grinding disc, of the metal, of the scale on the surface of the metal, of rust or paint. Those are particulate things that you could take into your body. Gaseous are usually the more invisible toxic fumes that are around us if we are welding, certain gases, things like carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide, nitrous dioxide. Well, you'll learn all about that in the welding lessons to come. Okay. So what we're going on to now is just a quick slide to show what your responsibility is. What is your responsibility with regards to PPE? Well, it's to use what's provided. So all that I showed you and give you in centre, I expect you to use, and things to be done and used correctly and responsibly. All right. So this method that I have seen people using when they're grinding away with a big angle grinder and they've got their eyes squinted together to try and stop sparks getting in their eyes is not a good method of eye protection. And I will be on you, all right, to use the proper piece of eyewear that protects you fully, all right? So moving on from that is, you've been reading up, hopefully, since lesson 1 about the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, and the employee as well as the employer has a duty. You have a duty of care to yourself and your colleagues. In other words, basically, if you spot a problem or a hazard, report it. Okay, someone else may report something that saves you from an accident, so you work together in that respect. If you report it, thinking back to lesson 1, what law from lesson 1 would it be that you are reporting something? And hopefully you're all shouting at me, and I can't hear, obviously, is RIDDOR. RIDDOR 1995, Reporting of Injuries, Diseases, Dangerous Occurrence Regulations. Of course, if we don't wear the correct PPE and we do, something does occur, then it's an accident. Now, we also looked at the definition of accidents, the unfortunate unplanned incident. Okay, and I'm sure you got that down from last time. But what we have to ensure is we know and recognize how an accident has happened and then what to do in case an accident has occurred. So looking at the next slide, we're into causes of accidents. And you'll see there that there's a couple of categories of indirect causes, and I'm sure we can all appreciate or experience one or more of these work pressures, and I'm sure really what should be on there is coronavirus, isn't it? That's a big work pressure that's caused a lot of changes in a lot of ways in which work is done, and is a pressure that could maybe be an indirect cause of accidents. Stress about wearing a mask all the time under other PPE could cause somebody to lose concentration and an accident occur. But just something worth talking about and looking at further. All right, so I'm not going to read all these out. This is for your benefit. You can go back to this at a later date and look at it more closely and take more notes, pause it, look at it at length. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, and we're looking at accident prevention. And there are 3 principles of accident prevention that move us on to the box in the bottom right hand corner, as they're all part of risk assessment and risk awareness. As I said earlier, we're going to look at that in a bit more detail. So the 3 principles to the left of the screen is to identify and remove hazards. If I give you this in a context of working in a welding bay or a welding environment, it's usually a small welding bay. And I'll say to people, keep it tidy, all right? Remove hot metal, get rid of it. It's a hazard, all right? Because the times people think they pick something up that's hot and the other one's cold, then they've injured themselves. To the right, where it says assess and control remaining risks, well, if you're going to keep metal samples in your bay, make sure they're cold, cool them down. And you'd be surprised at the amount of times I've been handed hot material by somebody with a glove on or holding it in a pliers and hand it to me in a bare hand as I'm walking past, because they've not thought to themselves to assess and control that risk. All right. They're not my best friend after that, I can tell you, if they hand me hot metal. And the final one in the middle, to influence behavior and attitudes. Well, that's all part of attending training, just like you're doing now. You're attending training to make sure you understand all these ways of accident prevention and the way accidents happen, and to keep up with current changes in legislation and regulations. All right. Now, moving on. As I said, we're looking at the steps to risk assessment. Now, straight away, some of you might be looking at that and say, four steps? I'm sure there's five steps to risk assessment. It depends on whose website, on whose forum you're on. But if you look at step 4, that is actually 2 aspects to step 4. And all they do is they split that one down. So let's look at them in detail in each one. Step 1, hazard identification. What might harm you or others? Step 2, decide who may be harmed and how. All right. Evaluate the risks and decide on control measures that are suitable. Step 4, record and review findings and ensure hazards are minimized. So like I said, sometimes we'll split 4 down into 2. So to record findings, and then step 5, review your findings. But generally speaking, most places, stick to the 4-step to risk assessment tooling. Now there's a bit of sometimes questions asked about who can carry out a risk assessment. Well, it's actually any competent person, and usually they're classed as competent if they've been trained and supervised doing so. They don't have to pass an exam or a test of any kind, as long as someone has deemed you responsible and competent, and it doesn't have to be a managerial responsibility. All right, that's handed down to the employees to take ownership of their own risk assessment. There are tools that help us with risk assessment, and these are the interesting things into how risk assessments are carried out. So let's look at how risk assessments are carried out. We've got what's called the hierarchy of risk controls. Now the risk matrix is coming next. This is the hierarchy of risks. And you see how it's a upturned pyramid or triangle, and that the black line on the left says as the higher up that you go, the more effective that risk control is. Thinking back to just what we said about physically remove the hazard, that's the best thing to do. And the lower down you go on that pyramid or risk hierarchy, the less effective is. So PPE, it's not effective, it's your last line of defense. It's the last thing that's going to save you from a possible accident occurring. So we have to have the correct and suitable PPE on. So let's just go through them. At the top then, yes, elimination. All right, I should be writing these down and remembering. I want you to remember these, engrave them in your head. Substitution, replace the hazard. An example could be if you're spray painting in a confined space or from an outside to inside confined space. Yes, you would have respiratory wear on your face, breathing mask, perhaps glasses or something like that. But there's ways in which the fumes could get to you and overwhelm you. So substitution would be don't spray paint it, brush paint it, or roller paint it. That's substituted the hazard. Yeah. An engineered control isolates workers from the hazard. In other words, you could use screens like we do in welding, portable welding screens, to pull across when somebody's welding out of a welding bay, and or tape an area off with cones, that sort of, and yellow and black hazard tape. Then you go on to administrative control, which is more of a managerial task, really, because it deals with the regular testing of equipment. Things like PAT testable, portable appliance testing, and training, on-the-job training if new machinery or changes to machinery and guarding has taken place. All right, so it's a very good tool to use in risk assessment, using the hierarchy of risk controls, along with the risk matrix, which is this. So what a risk matrix does, it assesses potential hazards and therefore control measures. We take the likelihood of an accident multiplied by the consequence or severity. So like it says there, likelihood times severity. Let me give you a couple of scenarios. So think about it, 2 scenarios. One is we're welding in a bay, in the workshop, in the ERR center, and it's a controlled environment. It's 1 person per bay. We've got a extraction ventilation system above. We've got all the very best PPE, fume extraction, fume hoods that blow fumes out of the breathing area. Regularly updated equipment and maintained welders. So let's look at that. So likelihood, the likelihood of something happening from 1 to 5. Well, You can't say it's rare because the odd little sparks get people. You'd say it's unlikely to possible. Unlikely to possible. The consequence of something happening then, the severity, it's usually only mild. The worst things we have had are little burns on the surface of the skin or something gone down a boot that you can't control, and it's just done a small burn to the skin, the surface of the skin. So if you look across to minor, moderate, 2 to 3 up likelihood, you're looking in the amber region of moderate to high. And it's what's known as a RAG system. You probably come into touch with this RAG. It means red, amber, green. And of course, red means stop immediately, doesn't it? Stop what you're doing. The risk is too high. Something needs to be put in place to change that working practice. So we've landed, because we are welding, and it is a dangerous, to some extent, practice, but certainly not as long as you take all the precautions. You're in the amber region, which just means to monitor, all right? Monitor what's going on, make sure. And we have watchers and people in place like that. And green just means very low risk, anything unlikely to happen, all right? So if we went and we looked at a different scenario, that we were welding at height on a scaffold in a warehouse that had a lot of workers moving around both on foot and on forklifts underneath, there are more potential hazards, aren't there? And you might score that a little higher. You might say 3 to 4 and up to 3 moderate, but certainly as long as you take the precautions and control hazards go in place. But you see how it works. You see how a risk matrix works in helping as a tool with risk assessment. Right, so that's quite a lot already talked about. What if all the precautions fail, all right, and an accident occurs? What's next? Where do we need to be looking at? Well, I'm sure some of you may be shouting, accident book. All right, we have to have an accident book. They can be quite different to others in their layout and features, but as you can see there, let's talk through a few of the special and important features that have to be on, and some that are missing from this example. I like it actually. It's by the name of the person's I bang it, and his injury is a hammer blow to the thumb. So I didn't write this. I found it, but I thought it was quite good. It's the date and time which the incident happened. It should have the name of the person injured and address and contact details. We'll come back to that in a slide or two. Are there any witnesses? All right, now there's no space on this one for witnesses. And also, is there any supporting CCTV evidence? That's a good tool and utilized very much nowadays, as CCTV is everywhere. Indeed, some machines have logs on them. So machine logs will actually record if, say, a guard's been lifted and something has happened in that period of time. And if a guard was lifted, then somebody's at fault. Somebody's done something wrong. It should include the type and nature of the injury sustained and a photo of the injury kept for records. Again, photographic evidence. The cause and full circumstances of the accident, what led to it. All right. And then of course, details of the treatment administered in that case there, anesthetic cream with a plaster. So the treatment administered and a photograph again, all right? But why? Why do we have to have all this details of an accident book, all right? What's it used for? Well, this is what it's used for. It's important to report accidents at work because it helps to cover yourself, cover your workers as a company and as a whole in case of any legal backlash. All right. It can be used in compensation claims, both for employers and employees, and decides of probably a cause of blame and who was at fault, or whether it was faulty equipment. Equipment breaks, guards break. Additionally, the accident book can be used to track trends in accidents. So common threads can be identified. So again, evidence gathering by the HSE. They'll take evidence from accident books and accident reports. A lot of it goes online now. It's all done and feeds into a national database. But the ultimate point of the accident book is to prevent accidents, so to learn from them and to gather evidence. But we have to be careful because of new regulations. In 2018 was the GDPR regs. GDPR, that's the General Data Protection Regulations. And if you can see behind me in that corner there, oh, sorry about that, that's my safe. And that's where my accident book lives. And that's where I like it to stay, so we don't have any accidents. All right. Now, if we are reporting, of course, we're all going back to RIDDOR, aren't we? And not just if there's an accident or near miss. I hope you looked up the definition of the words for a near miss and dangerous occurrence from part 1. And it also tells you in RIDDOR what is deemed reportable. So there's guidance on the HSE website and the gov.uk website as well. Right, takes us on to first aid. So as centre first aider here for Leeds, I would have the responsibility for completing the accident book and making sure everything's reported back to my immediate superiors. I'm not going to go into deep detail of first aid procedure. However, a basic first aid knowledge might be expected in an exam. And I showed you the apps that you can get on your phone. So good. What you can do with those. They tell you immediately the course of action to go into. So let's look at this fella. Now then, this poor fella has suffered from what looks like an apocalyptic set of injuries. All it's telling you is the various types of injuries that are common in engineering, manufacturing, construction. And we are going to look at in part 3 what the most common injuries are. So I'm not going to go through all these. It's clear to see what sorts of injuries you can get. I don't want to scare anybody. It's very unlikely. Of course, it's only through negligence that any sort of accidents occur. But let's go on to further first aid and what first aid is. So like I said, I've delivered first aid here. In the initial instance, treatment given to casualty before the arrival of a paramedic, doctor, or other qualified person. Okay, that said, just want to go through this on this board. So let me turn this over. Has anybody heard? Oh, I don't know if you can see that. Has anybody heard of Doctors ABC? All right, Doctors A, B, and C. So it stands for D, danger to the casualty or others. All right, danger to the casualty or others. R is for responsiveness. Are they responsive? Are they responsive to being shouted at? All right, you see that. S, to shout for help. All right, or call 999. And A is airways, blockages or swelling. B is for breathing. Are they not breathing, or is it shallow or irregular? And C, circulation. Is there any bleeding or trapped limbs? So all I want you to go on and do is look this up. First aid, Doctors ABC. DRSABC. All right. I'll leave that for you to look into. Should put that on a slide. Should put that on a slide, shouldn't I? Right. So that takes us up to progress check 1. So hopefully now you're wide awake and ready, and we're going to go straight into some questions. All right. So it should be welding, health and safety, PPE accidents, first aid, test 1. So I want you to go through these with us steadily. Don't scroll through right to the end. There's 6 questions. I'll read them out, and then I'll give you a chance to answer the question in front of you. So the first question, what are the 4 methods of a harmful substance finding their way into the body? Is it absorption, inhalation, touch, injection? Absorption, ingestion, inhalation, injection. Piercing, inhalation, ingestion, suction. or ingestion, injection, radiation, absorption. I don't want to read that again. That was difficult. Okay, give you a chance to answer that question. The 4 methods of a harmful substance finding their way into your body. Scroll up to number 2 for me. When dealing with an acidic substance that we might use to inspect the internal quality of a weld, what regulation is relevant? Is it Pure 1992, RIDOR, we've mentioned 1995, KOSH 1988, or MOR, MHOR 1992? Click on an answer and move on to number 3. What might you do on finding an open container of what you only suspect is oil in the workshop with no one in sight around it? Would you do nothing, as other workers may have just left the area and may be using that container and will come back shortly? Ignore the container, it has nothing to do with you. Move the container, if possible, to a safe location and report this immediately to your supervisor or works manager, or inform your supervisor or manager when you next see them. Click on an answer. Once you've decided, click an answer and scroll on. Hopefully you read on number 4. Thinking back to the hierarchy of risk, what was the top and most effective form of hazard control? Is it to wear PPE at all times? Was it administrative control, for instance, training staff and inspecting machinery, possible hazards? Was it to be elimination, to physically remove the hazard that is present? Or was it an engineered control that protects the worker from the hazard? Click an answer and move on. In the first aid situation, I need to cover that. What was the first aider consider? First thing they do on finding a casualty. All right. Is it D for danger? Are any bystanders, the casualty and first aider safe from further harm? Was it R for response? Check for consciousness, asking loudly if they are all right and what happened. Is it the A for airway? Identify the casualty as airway blockages, choking or suffocating. If they're unconscious, do you start CPR? Or is it C for circulation? Does the casualty appear to be bleeding badly or presenting heart attack or stroke symptoms? Once you've decided, click your answer and move on to number 6. What are the reasons for completing the accident book from the following options? Should it have the name of the person or persons involved, personal details, date and time, the type and nature of the injury sustained, including photos, the cause of the accident and treatment administered, or all of the above are equally important? Give it a thinking about. Click your answer, move on, and hopefully you can submit all your answers and we should start seeing some results, or you should start seeing some results and see where you are. So let's scroll back up. I'll scroll back down. And of course, the 4 ways are absorption, ingestion, inhalation, injection. Hopefully you got that one. I'm sure you got the, when dealing with an acid, obviously it's dealing with control of substances that are hazardous to health. KOSH 1988. If you find that open container, I'm sure you would have said, well, we don't know that it's oil and we can't leave it there in case somebody puts their hand in it or falls on it, slips. Move the container to a safe location and report immediately to your supervisor. Thinking about the hierarchy of risk, I'm sure you all got the top answer was to eliminate, physically remove that hazard that is present and get rid of it. In first aid, we've just covered it. So clearly it was doctors AB, DRS, ABC, and I just put it as the top answer. D is for danger. Are any bystanders or the casualty and first aider safe from further harm? It could be that they've been electrocuted and the electric supply is still on. All right. And you could be going into a situation that's going to cause you to get injured. So D for danger first. And sixth, the reasons for completing the accident book were, of course, all of the above were equally important, and you need to make sure everything's filled in correctly. So back to our presentation, and we shall carry on from there. Okay, we're looking now into fire. All right, fire. So there'll probably be questions on the Gola around types of extinguishers and classifications of fire. So I'm going to go through these just briefly, but I suspect that you'll be pretty good into this already. All right. You'll have seen the fire triangle. You'll have seen that there are 3 elements needed. Keep one element away from the other 2, and a fire cannot exist. And this is how fire extinguishers work, by eradicating one of the fire triangle constituent parts. These are just some examples, and looking at fire extinguishers, they used to be complete colors. The whole of the fire extinguisher was that color. Now it's just a colored band. But in the case of water, because it's red, it's usually a full red fire extinguisher with a white label, or sometimes black, but it's just classed as all red. Okay, they class it as red. All right, so you've got your CO2. Looking at the next slide. Sorry, your next slide. This is the class of fires, and you'll see there that it goes from A, B, C. There's actually D, E, and F, and we'll show you that next. But this is just to give you an idea. So you can see that wood and textiles are known as combustibles, solids, as a class A fire. You can use water, and that's the red fire extinguisher. It's really important that you know the correct fire extinguisher for the correct type of fire. It's extremely dangerous in some cases if you didn't. So petrol or flammable liquids is your next class B. All right, and it's a foam extinguisher, and that's a cream band. If it's a gas torch that's got out of control, or a hose line, a propane torch, a gas is C, and you would use a carbon dioxide extinguisher, which is a black. And electrical E could be dry powder and CO2, both classified electrical, and they are blue and black respectively. Again, I want you to look into these class of fires, look into them yourself, make sure you know them. This is the more extensive list there. And if you look at it from A, B, C, D, E, F, your symbol is right there. Solids, liquids, gases, metal fires, electricity, and fat fires. So the last one is quite a special classification. And they work, the extinguishers are known as an AFFF extinguisher. All right. And AF, that stands for aqueous film forming foam. And it smothers the fire and turns the fat surface into like a non-combustible waxy gel. All right. So they're a very special type of fire extinguisher. AFFF, aqueous film forming foam. Look those classifiers up and make sure you know them. As you can see here, all right, we're talking about storage of fire extinguishers. Pretty difficult to spot amongst all that rubbish. But that takes us on to fire extinguishers need to be checked. They need to be checked annually. They must be done every 12 months. That's not the same as replaced. That's done after 5 to 10 years, dependent on the extinguisher. But they must be checked. So we have to have a company comes into centre and looks at all the seals and the condition of the fire extinguisher every 12 months to make sure it complies with fire regulations. All right. Another thing you see often is people hanging things on extinguishers, covering them up so people can't see where they are, putting them in a doorway to hold a door open. You'd be amazed at how often this happens. So never, ever do it. So if we're talking about fire and fires occurring, we need to go on to the Means of Escape Fire Precautions Act 1971. And this is all about means of escape. And you can see there in the slide to the left, the little picture of smoke. And we know that smoke is the bigger killer than the actual fire itself. Quite often there are markings showing the way out at low level to places. All right. And fire exit, make sure they've got nothing in front of them blocking the escape route. What sort of signs are we looking at? The one to the right that shows a clearly marked exit. We should be remembering from the first lesson that that's a category of an emergency sign. Information in case of an emergency. All right. So we've got the fire. What's the action in the event of a fire? Well, the first thing, wherever you are, to raise the alarm. All right. So just quickly click you onto AV. I can't do it. Never mind, we won't do that. I'll show it you on here. There you have it, a little button. Once you click that, it shows it's been deployed. And this reset for these things are on the bottom, and it takes it back off. And as a fire marshal for the center, we have to check those periodically and make sure they're working correctly. Press it, shows it's being deployed. Just thought you might not have seen one being used like that. So raise the alarm. Fight only if appropriate. What does fight the fire with? The extinguishers are everywhere. Well, only if it's appropriate to do so. In other words, if you're behind the fire with no means of escape, or it's getting around you, get out. If there's too many fumes from the fire, whatever's burning, and it's causing you adverse health effects, get out. Okay. Then number 3, evacuate the building. Make sure you leave the building by the nearest exit. And 4, call for assistance only when you're safe to do so, 999. And the other thing that you might be expected to know, when you've done all those things, so make sure you know that sequence, raise the alarm, fight if appropriate, evacuate the building, call for assistance. On the next slide, we talk about, those of you that are in work, do you have a fire marshal? Are you a fire marshal? Well, know your nearest fire exit and your fire assembly point. So what's that symbol for a fire assembly point? What's it look like? You should all be thinking of a white tick on a green background. Yeah. So that fire assembly point tells you where to go. All right. A white tick on a green background. So that's a little bit of work on fires. Takes us nicely onto progress check 2. So let's go back to our questions. I'll put the next set up, and we should have test number 2 coming on your screen now. Only 5 questions. Again, I'll read through and then let you click on an answer. So how often should a competent person check a fire extinguisher? Is it every 6 months, every 12 months, every 24 months, or only when it's being used? How often do we check a fire extinguisher? Number 2, what are the 3 essential factors for fire to burn? Do they have to have carbon dioxide, fuel and heat, fuel, heat and oxygen, flames, air and carbon dioxide, fuel, heat and nitrogen? The 3 factors for fire to burn. Click an answer and move on. What classification of fire do gases come under? All right. What classification of fire do gases come under? Is it class A, class B, class C, or class D? Click your answer, what you think it is, for classification of gas fires. Number 4. What is the first action you should try to do in the event of a fire? What's the first action? Is it to fight the fire if appropriate and safe to do so with the correct extinguisher? Get you and anyone nearby you see out of the building. Raise the alarm or call the fire emergency services. The very first thing you should do. Click an answer and move yourself on. Number 5, finally, a hot work permit is a document which allows, is it work in hot weather, work which involves working in a hot enclosed environment, work which involves working on hot machinery, or is it work where there is a risk of starting a fire? A hot work permit document, hot work permit. So click your answer, move on, and hopefully submit your answers. And we should start getting, you should start seeing your result. And the results come up, check, and we'll just check through now how you went on through your questions. And of course, we should see that it's every 12 months that a fire extinguisher is checked to make sure we've got the correct documentation in place for under Fire Regulations Act. The 3 essential factors for a fire to burn, of course, were fuel, heat, and oxygen. The classification of fire gases come under is Class C. The first action that you do in the event of discovering a fire, raise the alarm, press that button, make sure the bells are sounding. And finally, a hot work permit is a document where there's a risk of starting a fire. So it's typically you'd be grinding, welding, brazing, soldering, something that involves where there's a risk of starting a fire. All right, guys, moving back then. So that's the end of your progress check 2, and more or less the end of this lesson. So I'll just talk you through the important information again, remembering that I need you to study further for this. Watch it again. Make sure you study thoroughly for the exam and watch the recording as many times as you can. Keep up with your smart screen study and your trade job mate videos. And look into those apps and get some of those apps underway. Look online as well for health and safety online quizzes and questions. Study and revise. Don't panic, just revise. Don't underestimate the amount of study you need to do. And all the learning materials that you've been provided by your learning provision are important, and you need to do these, okay? Your exams, as soon as we can have you in centre and the government lift restrictions and we can get you in here and get you sat in those nice computer suites, then we'll get you through your exams and you'll got all this knowledge and all this extra time to study. I'm sure you're all going to get a wonderful distinction from your exam. All right, so please make sure you attend part 3. This was part 2. You can go back and watch part 1. Watch this one again. I'll hopefully see you for part 3. Those of you that are attending, just leaves me to say thank you for attending. So nice to see you here. Take care, stay safe, and keep up with the social distancing, and let's smash this horrible virus and hopefully get back into centre as soon as we can. So thank you very much. It's been great to have you here. You take care. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.